see so many of you coming to us, to Zurich today from all over the place. It's beyond what we imagined when we started to set up the event. And we have kind of like a pre-event now from the main hackathon, so I guess throughout the afternoon more and more people will come. And I'm very happy that we have that we can use this opportunity now to look at the digitalization efforts that are ongoing in our industry for a couple of years from a little bit of a different perspective. And we got together quite an interesting panel, I think, of people who deal with the topic of open source and digitalization in general. And to start, I want to frame a little bit of what's happening now in the next 3 hours. Just one quick word to myself. I'm an architect by training. I used to code when I was in university and also in practice a lot, and had the opportunity to also work with a large contractor here in Switzerland, in Kenya. It's one of the largest contractors, and was responsible for implementing digital planning and building processes, and learned a lot about how actually construction works and what also works in terms of digitalization and whatnot. And I had the opportunity 3 years ago to also found a software company. And in this process, I learned a lot. Not always the good things, but there was some frustration involved in this whole thing, because you start with big ambitions and you want to change so much, and at some point you hit the walls. And when I look back a little bit, like when I was coming from university with a backpack full of scripting skills and everything, and I went into the architect's office and I started to code, at some point I realized I was the only one who was coding and no one would ever pick up my code. Probably because it was not well documented, but I guess it's not the real top reason. It's more other people just didn't have the time and framing to really work with it as well. Then also when I was working in Kenya, we really had cool projects where we actually even employed software engineers, and we built frameworks and we used it in projects, but like when either the people left or the projects were not funded anymore, everything just came to a stop. So you start something, it looks cool, you have the marketing machine going, but like a year later, no one even knows anymore where the code actually is. And then when we started the software company, I really learned a lot about actually the potential of open source. Like when you build a website or whatever you do, especially in the web domain, you don't reinvent the wheel from scratch. You assemble lots of open source libraries, put them together, and the value actually is from bringing the good stuff together in the right fashion, not reinventing everything again from scratch. And that's kind of when the frustration turned into something else. And it's like when you're really somewhere where you don't see the light, and then things happen, it's really cool. So I learned that I'm not the only one actually who has the same problems. I mean, there's so many smart people like you, all of you, sitting around somewhere, working on the same problems. So I gained the trust that I'm not alone, and that there's lots of things possible, and there's much energy in the room and in the space when we come together and do things a bit different than we used to do it. And this energy made me also organize this event today, because when we started with this whole thing a year ago, I was really happy to see like how many people got an interest in open source and in digitalization on a different level. And this energy is also supported with sense. So personally, it gives me sense to have something larger to work on. But also open source itself makes sense. It's nothing that we need to reinvent again from scratch in the construction industry. It's a principle that's there for many years, especially in the software world. And I took this from Christian. But I think this frames it really well. Like, this is the world where we come from. You think you have a good idea, you collect money, and you do start to build it with the hope that it eventually will really skyrocket. But if, like, from more than 15 years of innovation in the construction industry, there's one thing that I really learned. First, it's highly fragmented, so whomever you talk to, they have different needs. Second, it's not really digitized yet, so very little companies really have a solid IT stack, which you can build stuff on top without reinventing everything. And third, obviously, change is difficult if you don't have an IT background. And that's why I think The open source approach is really powerful. And you can see it on the lines. You have the hope, and also probably you can be sure that it will grow, and you will not just pay for it all the time, but it's just as a different business model. It's like you find a community, you start to build stuff in the open, and once you gain traction, you can build services on top, and you just have different ways to actually monetize it. And what's interesting to me is that it's, at least in my perception, like the user needs and the community is much more relevant if you develop stuff in the open than if you just have a product where you always have to convince someone to use it and pay for it. And also the dynamics that occur from many people using an open source library and having an interest of it to be developed further is really something that can help us as an industry tremendously, at least at the point where we are right now. And I also like this comparison very much when you consider like how tech actually works today. Like in the 90s, Microsoft built the Explorer and they hoped everyone would jump on the Explorer and only use and build stuff on top of their proprietary frameworks, and they only shared very little. Today it's just the other way around. People understand that you need so much technology that it's almost impossible to build everything from scratch and maintain it over time. So it's much more interesting to work with dynamic sources, put them together, and be much closer to the client's needs from the beginning, instead of investing so much time to build up a value proposition that's really valuable to the clients. And it's like, and that's what we learned with the software startup. We had good plans, it sounded very well, everyone was interested, but the amount of effort that we had to put in to build a viewer, to build like all the analysis algorithms, to build the website, and to build everything is beyond. It's not like, it's almost impossible to really bootstrap it. So that's also part of why we need to look at things differently. And I framed it already, but modern software is really unthinkable without open source. Many examples of different companies doing stuff, and if you do stuff, you will certainly use one of these libraries at some point and just implement it. And what I find interesting now in the context of the open source, of the construction industry, is that for some companies outside the IT world, the digital transformation also becomes unthinkable without open source. And I put it a little bit in my own words now, but as I take it, and Roger will talk about the same thing from the Siemens perspective in a minute, Mercedes-Benz said, like, if they want to successfully transform from a car manufacturing company to a software company that also produces cars, they will not be able to do so if they do everything by themselves. So they came up with a quite ambitious manifesto, the open source manifesto, where they actually really support and encourage their employees to work with open source components and actually also feedback into the community. And since we talked quickly about the manufacturing industries, this graph is here for many years, and it's still, we can take away a lot of it. I mean, despite all these efforts of BIM and digitalization and everything, like the productivity in planning offices, but also on the construction side, has not really risen in the last couple of years. And if you put on the next to it one of the key sentences from open source, I think the potential becomes very clear. So Jim Whitehurst framed it famously that open source is not necessarily about saving money, it's about doing more stuff and getting continuous innovation, and that's where it really becomes interesting with the limited budget that we have. And if you talk about continuous innovation with the really limited resources that we have in all the planning and engineering and construction and operating organizations, it really makes sense to, at least on an infrastructure level, to say, okay, we don't do it all by ourselves, let's come together and find good ways to push ourselves and the industry together. And to come to an end, I quickly want to frame again the most relevant topics, actually, why companies have an open source strategy. Like the first topic certainly is community. Like if you build a product that gains traction and people pick it up and work with it, you know it's something that works, not only for your company, but for others as well. you will get really valuable feedback that will help you to continuously develop that solution further. And also the topic of security, obviously, if many people deploy it, they have an interest that it works, and they give you straight feedback, and it's possible to keep on working on it and making it secure. I think Christian will also talk about it a little bit later about their own project, like how this works and why it's relevant. Efficiency. I think even the ones that haven't coded yet have experience with setting up an Excel sheet or Google sheet and putting formulas in it and being super proud of it, but after like 6 months laying it somewhere and you have to revisit it, you don't know anymore about how it really works. So that's really one of the key topics next to continuous development for me. To build something is one side of the map, but to continuously run and maintain it is really also really resource intense. And if you put it on a different layer, it can be much easier to maintain stuff and keep it up to date. And obviously open interfaces to have data exchange, not only in proprietary formats and everything. I think you guys know what I'm talking about. Then digital sovereignty, moving slowly away from vendor lock-in. I mean, it's not possible entirely, but it's the way we have to push things forward, to be also more conscious about where data actually lies, like not having it somewhere, but having the potential to run stuff on premise. And in general, just having a strong negotiating position if you procure software, say, okay, we don't need yours, we have options, and these options have a different dynamic. And last but not least, also employer attractiveness. And this event that we've set up now, I mean, we have 230 people registered for this hackathon and this open source event. And I have not expected so many people really being interested to come here from all over Switzerland and Europe and basically and Canada and India. It's really cool to see it. But that shows that through this movement, you as a coder and as a software developer have just more visibility because you work in a bigger context and you're not just lost in one silo in one company. No one knows about your work. And also, especially in the construction industry, if you have little resources to employ people and then you have a software engineer, that's what we learned from Kenya, and make them work on stuff that's almost impossible to solve by them, it's even more interesting to use these little resources and put them in a bigger context. To keep really the good talent, attract the good talent to your companies. Just a couple last sentences about open source construction before we start with the talks. Open source construction started really like almost a year, or a bit more than 1 year ago, out of the reasons that I just explained. And it started really simple. We put up a website where I started it just putting some thoughts together, and I brought some people together in a local community event. That's where it gained traction actually. And what we did in the last year is we had several events, mostly in Zurich, where we brought together engineers and architects and software engineers and non-coders, and formed a group of people who we meet regularly and we talk about how we can move it on. And we stepped out slowly now from just being that local circle in Switzerland. We have Jascha here, who is also very helpful and interested in pushing and being a representative for us in Germany. And Christian, I think he's not here yet, but he will be here later. So this really is also cool to see that we have quite good discussions in a larger group of people with a diverse background. And one of the core goals that we have in the beginning is that we want to bridge the gap. The gap between coders and other digital doers who are really interested and invested in the digital transformation, and also open source and other solution providers, and the non-digital decision makers in our industry. Because that's one big learning also, that many people who procure software or employ people in our industry have never studied software engineering or learned about it in their education, or neither in their professional life. So giving through the platform of opensource.construction and through this different approach to digitalization, these people a platform to just ask questions and to kind of have a different perspective of how you can actually push digitalization is one of our key issues. And that's also why we what we do in our main activity streams. Like we have set up the website to communicate about the topics and to give a really low threshold barrier for everyone to inform themselves about the movement and about its potentials and its risks and so on. Connecting is super important, that's why we do these events, and we also try to do them physically like this, where we have a weekend to really connect and talk to each other differently afterwards. And we also share knowledge. Like if there are companies, we start to consult a bit on how to move and how to kind of do the first steps into these directions. And the key goal really is we want to increase the capacity to act for people in the industry. Not being locked into, okay, either I have to buy one piece of software that promises to do everything that I need, but that certainly does not all that I need, or being stuck in, okay, I need to employ software engineers, but I don't know how to lead them on. Like, there's the third way, the open way, and that's what we want to really push into the industry. And that's why we came together here and organized this panel, that it's not only me talking about how cool and exciting everything is, but that we really have experts with us. And I quickly want to go through the agenda. So we have 3 blocks. We have first insights into the open source initiative at Siemens. So Roger will come up to the stage in a second. And then we have the second block, where we really want to talk about how to interact as organizations from the construction industry with existing open source solutions. And we always have like tandem presentations where we have an organization from the industry and a software or open source solution provider. And we cover the range from, you can just work with a library that's free of charge, or you can even, what you almost can't do in a proprietary software tool, you can go and say, okay, there's a gap, there's a specific need, let's go finance it and build it, and so we have it in a fraction of the time. And the third one is also very interesting. If you don't find a solution that's there and you need it, you can also start something yourself, and that's why we have Christian talking about in a second. So, let us welcome Roger to the stage.